again. We're dedicating tonight's learning, my part of it at least, to the sacred memory of my mother-in-law, Hilda Rappaport. Those of you who are from Chicago and know Chicago know who Hilda Rappaport was. If you didn't, briefly, she lived to 102 and a half. She was considered the grand dam of Ida Crown Jewish Academy. If you've heard of Ida Crown, my father-in-law, Olva Shalom, invented it. Principal for 35 years, and she was very much a part of that, though she never taught there. She was president of every Orthodox organization in town you can imagine. I won't go through the list because I have only 35 or 45 minutes here. But it's funny, Larry Engelhardt, who's taping tonight's, taped the Levaya as well. It was at the Academy as per her wishes. Her grandkids spoke, and her kids spoke as were her wishes. There were hundreds of people there. The Academy student body was sitting in the bleachers, as was her wish. Who has bleachers at a funeral? You know, my mother-in-law had bleachers at a funeral. This is the, so this way you get an idea of who she was. If you want to see a little more about who she was, go on the Ida Crown website. The whole funeral is actually on YouTube. So my mother-in-law is actually in a cloud right now in several different ways. But there's a 90-second interview of her posted on the Ida Crown website. We get who she was and the dynamic quality of her. So I'm dedicating this in her memory. Okay. Amen. Thank you very, very much. Okay. If I had more time, I'd go around, because I know many of you, but not all of you, but I'm afraid I don't have time. Tell me your names anyway. Let's just go around and get to know each other, okay?
Sarah Steinberg.
Sarah Steinberg.
Marilyn Price.
Marilyn.
Bill Watchlog.
Gloria Watchlog.
Larry Stein. Aaron Stein.
Noam Stadler.
Stephen Flack. Asha Lopatin.
Okay, thank you all for coming. Joe Ozarowski.
Asha Lopatin.
The Asha Lopatin. How many of them are there?
Lopatin.
Okay. All right. My material tonight is based in part on my book, which is called To Walk in God's Ways. It's actually in plural. And you'll understand where I got the title from in a few minutes. But I'm taking a slightly different approach to the same material tonight, because I have a theory that I'm hoping to share with you this evening about what it means to become godly or godlike, which may or may not be the same as godless. I don't know. You'll decide that for yourselves. But it's I'll let the material actually speak for itself. So we'll start here. Okay, ready? This is the Gemara in Sota Daf Yud Dalet. It is I consider it the foundational text for Gemilut Chasdim. There are other texts in rabbinic literature that deal with Gemilut Chasdim. Who can give me a working definition of Gemilut Chasdim? Anybody? Please.
Deeds of loving kindness.
Deeds of loving kindness. Anybody want to add to that or give a different definition?
Giving when you don't have to.
Giving when you don't have to. That's good. That actually matches very, very nicely. And of course, I don't know if you thought about it, but maybe you did. That differs from tzedakah in what way?
The root of tzedakah is tzedek, which is justice.
It's justice or righteousness. Chesed is...
Tzedakah is your money, and chesed is with your body.
That's right. And tzedakah is for...
It's an obligation.
It's an obligation. It's for people who need it. Chesed may be for people who need it, but also maybe for people who don't need it. Or maybe they don't know what their needs are, and we'll decide that for ourselves as we go through the material. So, all right, so this is, in my opinion, this is the foundational text for it, and you'll understand why I think that in a minute. Rabbi Chama said in the name of Rabbi Chanina, "My dichtiv." What does it mean when the Torah in Deuteronomy and Devarim writes, "Acharei Hashem Elokechem telech," you should walk after the Lord your God. Walk after the Lord your God. Is it possible for a person to walk after God's presence, after the Shechina? Can you really do that? Doesn't it already say elsewhere in Dvarim, Ki Hashem Elokecha Eish Ochlahu, that the Lord your God is a consuming fire? Now, there's a question here. What's bothering the rabbis here? What's bothering Chazal here? Clearly there's a question. What's the question? What's the problem?
How close can we get to God without getting burned?
Very good. How close can we get to God without being burnt? And I think there's a sub-question that probably undergirds that question, which is, what does it mean to get close to God? What does that mean? How do you get close to God? And what could that possibly be? To put it possibly in philosophical terms, we're dealing with immanence versus transcendence. And how do you do that? How do you navigate that? How do you negotiate that? Ella, but it must mean la'aloch achar midotav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to walk after God's ways, to walk after God's midot. What are midot? How do you translate midot? Characteristics. Yeah, good. I like that. That's actually good. For the book, this is where I got the title from the book, from To Walk in God's Ways. To walk after God's midot, after God's characteristics. Now, Chazal could have stopped right there, but they didn't. They gave us some examples. And I'd like you to follow these examples along with me, and then we're going to talk about them a little bit. Mahu malbish aramim, just as the Holy One, just as God clothes the naked, dichtiv, as it writes in Bereshit, in Genesis, Vayas Hashem Elokim la'adam lishto kotnot or vayal bishem, that the Lord God made for the man and his wife leather clothings and covered them. Who did God make leather clothing for? Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava. So God was the first tailor in history. Okay, God makes suit of clothes, leather clothes actually. Af ata halbesh arumim. So you too should clothe the naked. Okay. HaKadosh Baruch Hu bikar cholim. God visits the sick. This is the source of bikar cholim. This is the source of everything that I do in my professional life. Actually, I get it all from here. And now you know why I became a chaplain and why I do pastoral work in my little piece of the rabbit. God visits the sick, and we're going to explore this a little bit more. Dichtiv, as it says, Vayera elav Hashem be'elonei mamre, and God appeared to him in Elonei Mamre. To whom did God appear in Elonei Mamre? Abraham Avinu. And do you remember why God appeared to Abraham in Elonei Mamre? After Abraham brised himself. Yes, we're going to talk about that. Okay? So just as Hashem appeared to Avram and Elonei Mamre, Af ata bikar cholim, so you too should visit the sick. Kodesh Baruch Hu nicham avelim. God comforts the bereaved, and now you know another reason why I chose this text for tonight. I'm not halachically bereaved, but my wife is, and if you follow the Ishto Kagufo or flip it around of Ish Kagufa, I'm mourning too. I can tell you this, just so you should know. Even though I'm not blood relative, I was very close to my mother-in-law, and I must tell you, the feelings that I felt over this past week, the thoughts I had, and the heart experiences that I had reminded me of exactly how I felt when my father died 8 years ago. I described this to my wife Ashira and to members of her family, the Rappaports, and my kids, who all came in from Israel, New York as well. So I described it. I felt as if I'd lost a close relative. So God was there comforting us. And how do we know that? What's the proof text for that? Dichtiv, as it says later on in Bereshit, Vayi achari mot Avraham vayivarech Elokim et Yitzchak beno. And it was after the death of Abraham, and God blessed Isaac his son. Af ata nicham avelim. So you too should comfort the bereaved. Kadosh Baruch Hu kover meitim. God buries the dead. Dichtiv, as it says, vayikbor oto bagai, and God buried him in the valley. Who did God bury in the valley? Moshe Rabbeinu. God officiated Moses' funeral. All right, that's what it says at the end of the Torah. Af ata kvor meitim. So you too should bury the dead. Now, before we get into specifics, what is this text teaching you? What do you learn from this text? There are more source sheets floating around. So, what do you learn from this text? What do you hear in this Maimar Chazal?
Well, it's interesting that there's a combination. Things that we consider ethical and Ben Adam Chavero are actually spiritual, or Ben Adam Makom, are rituals also. And so sometimes we...
Ritual performed by God.
Yeah, right. That's why they're not so from, because they're a former God.
Worshipping man, or serving man.
Yeah, that's interesting.
There is actually a proof for that. There's a Gemara in Brachot, and I don't remember the exact daf, but there are other people who might remember it, where they talk about God's tefillin. You know that Gemara? And what's written in God's tefillin? Mi kamcha Yisrael, who is like your people Israel. It's the same thing. That God, takes care. That's right. Good. We're going to come back to this point. What else?
Well, these are ways in which we can emulate God. We can walk in God's way.
Now let's unpack this for a minute. These are ways in which we can emulate God. Why did Chazal choose these ways to emulate God? Let's follow standard practice and assume there are 613 mitzvot in the Torah. Which account we use is not important, but there are hundreds of mitzvot in the Torah. Okay, and Chazal did not say, if you want to be like God, offer a korban, offer a sacrifice. He didn't say that. If you want to be like God, eat matzah on Pesach. It doesn't say that. If you want to be like God, fast on Yom Kippur, or keep Shabbat, or do this, or do that. It doesn't say any of those things. It says these things. Why?
Because these are things we know God did.
So there are things we know God did, but God does a lot of stuff in the Torah. Why these things?
He didn't tell us to do these things directly. It's we have to look to his example.
I think you're both right, but I think there's got to be more, because I think you can find other examples of that in
These
the
are
Torah.
things we can do.
There are things we can do
For other people.
for other people. That's what ties everything else we've said so far together. Now, clearly, and as Rav Asher pointed out a few minutes ago, there's a bein adam lamakom here. There's a human-to-human factor here, which is part of the path that helps us become more godlike, but I think it goes even deeper. These are not the only bein adam lamakom, bein adam lachavero, human-to-human mitzvot in the Torah. Why these? Why these four?
Because of our vulnerability.
Ah, very good. What do these four things have in common with each other? There's a thread that ties them all together. These four cases are examples of the most vulnerable people in society. Poor, the needy, the sick, the bereaved, and the dead. And you all know, I think this is a fairly well-educated group, why do we call, burying the dead chesed shel emet? What's the reason why? You all know this?
No repayment.
Because no repayment. They can't say thank you. My mother-in-law can't say thank you directly to me for what I did for her in the last week, what I did for her family, my wife's family in the last week or so. I mean, up there, I think she is happy, and I think she's delighted we gave her a funeral with hundreds of people and great stuff. I think she's delighted with it. It's what she wanted. And forgive me for referring back. I think it ties directly to my point here. 2.5 weeks ago, I had my last conversation. She told us what she wanted. She told us she wants at the academy at Ida Crown. She wants the student body to be there. She wants her children and grandchildren to speak. And when I asked her, you're going to like, is Larry Engelhardt still here? No, he's not. He's going to like this stuff. When I asked her Chicago Jewish funerals, as a funeral direction, and she said, a funeral home? She said, I'm not going to a funeral home. That's for dead people, That's where dead people go, No, she wanted with teenagers and life. And so part of how we, so we become godlike in how we treat the people who are neediest, the most vulnerable members of society. So it's chesed shel emet. That's what pulls it together. Okay? Now, what does that suggest about being godlike? What does that tell us? Let's turn this back now to my original question. What does this suggest about being godlike? So then, according to this Gemara, how do we become godlike? Like God. What's that?
Being nice.
You're on the right track. Deepen it a little bit more. Extending yourself in what context? See, the other people's needs who are the most vulnerable. We become godlike by becoming as human as we possibly can. Now, this is where the theology part comes in here. And a number of you mentioned this early on. We become godlike by becoming as human as we possibly can. Okay?
I mean, one thing about all these different things, though, is
Yes.
that we have to come outside ourselves because it's not like a scripted interaction. Like, we don't it's kind of clouded, like, meaning you don't know the right thing to say necessarily at a shiva, or with the person who is ill.
Mm-hmm.
But, and you know, just as God, we don't see all of God's ways, but you have to put yourself in a situation of presence, even without necessarily a roadmap.
Ooh, that's very good. I like that, and I'm going to actually build on that a little bit. To extend yourself, to reach beyond yourself, perhaps to transcend yourself in a situation where somebody else is feeling vulnerable. And so Chazal built a whole structure of Avelut, which we're going to touch on, but not go into deeply. We'll talk about it right now, actually. Again, there's Torah Shebichtav, which is Torah Shebal Peh, and then there's Torah Shebal Peh, which is Torah Shebal Peh. This is oral Torah that became written Torah. Now I'm going to tell you the oral Torah. Again, my experience this week, what works in a Shiva house. It's when people actually reached out and told us about my mother-in-law and allowed us the space and time to talk about her. And in fact, forgive me, I don't usually talk about this. This is my experience in the last week, but it very much ties to the subject. Where was God in the relationship? This is a clinical pastoral education question, CPE question. When you ask a chaplain, and when you have chaplaincy training, when you describe a situation of a relationship, they'll ask you, where was God in that relationship? So where was God? God was in the stories about my mother-in-law that we shared with each other. And to the extent that a shiva could be fun, our shiva was fun, actually. It was lively. I mean, we cried and we shed tears, but we had a lot of fun. There's a lot of laughter because she was a very colorful person. Because people went beyond themselves and reached out to us and allowed us to reach back and tell our own stories, which is what the halach of shiva is. Who starts the conversation? You all know the answer to this, right? The morning starts the conversation, which in my book, and this is the one commercial, I didn't bring any copies to sell, but if you want to, it's on Amazon. The hardcover was sold out a long time ago. The softcover is available. In the book, I talk about how the Avelut relationship at a Shiva house is actually a great model for visiting the sick as well, because they both come from the same source. And when you study chaplaincy, here's the commercial for chaplaincy now, part of what the professionalized chaplain does is take their lead from the client and the patient. In other words, by using carefully crafted listening skills, reflective listening, and presence, we begin to develop that relationship with the patient, allowing them to open up to us. And God is in the room. In a text that I did not bring with me tonight, but it's elsewhere. It's in the Daram Daf Mem, I believe, or Mem Aleph. We talk about how God is at the head of every patient. God's there. And if you think about that a little bit more, you realize that if God's at the head of every patient, then that also must make a hospital or a skilled nursing facility a very holy place. We're not used to thinking of hospitals as holy places, but if we extend ourselves and build that relationship, become godlike in that way, of course God's there. How could God not be there? So, okay. Any other thoughts or comments on the text, and I'll not move on, but go on.
Can I ask a chaplaincy
Please,
question?
please.
So, it's interesting when you talk about, when you visit the sick, having the person who's sick start the conversation. Because I feel like in a lot of circumstances we try to cheer them up, and maybe, some people just want to listen, and just, maybe their speaking abilities aren't 100%, and so just kind of, they just want to hear from you sometimes, and just having someone, share with them is comforting. Where do you kind of see best practices in doing in those situations?
An excellent question. Let me define, part of the goal of chaplaincy is not necessarily to cheer them up, unless they want to be cheered up. And we can discern from our listening to them, what we've heard, that they want to be cheered up, but that's not necessarily the goal. Many people think it is. Bikur Cholim, which is the amateur version. Chaplaincy is the professionalized version. Bikur Cholim is what everybody is supposed to do. Now I'm going to come back to that momentarily. But we want to be there with them and help them figure out what is meaningful to them. It might mean being cheered up. It might be figuring out what's troubling them. It might mean other things as well. So best practices involve the careful listening and reflecting back and helping them sort of journeying where they want to journey. And we really being the kli, the vessel, the facilitator to help them. That's a really good question. Yes?
It's a refreshingly unpolitical text, in that so much of Torah can be divisive, and so much of the world today is polarized. But this doesn't talk about the job has to get done. You can't outsource this to government, or we debate how do we take care of the sick. This is about chesed that each of us has to do ourselves, right? It's not about society. And I think that is a really great unifier for Klal Yisrael. That like we all can be a part of this chesed in a really unpolarizing way.
It's also quite universal. It's not just,
Right.
it's not specifically Jewish, these values
Oh,
and
yes.
needs.
Yeah, absolutely. They're definitely universal. We can distill many things. And on Shmuley and Milt's point, we can actually go a step further. Let me ask you a question. From this text, whose job is it to visit the sick? It's everyone's job. It is no more my job to visit the sick than it is your job to visit the sick. So it's universal on other dimensions as well. In other words, when I was a congregational rabbi, so I was several decades in the pulpit rabbinate, not in Chicago, but everybody expected the rabbi to visit the hospitals, and it's still the case in most shuls. Although I'll be honest, I did research that's based on a Protestant model. The Protestant model is that based on 16th century text of what's called seal sorge, which is a Northern European term, and it has to do with the idea of the pastor being the pastor of the flock, which is where the term pastoral care comes from, by the way. And we use that term too, although we're getting away from, we call it spiritual care now. Because it really, from the Jewish perspective, it is not the role of the pastor of the rabbi to visit. What I do suggest in my written work is that rabbis should be better trained and be the experts, the exemplars in this, so that the rest of people, just that we should be exemplars in so many other things as well. To be ethical exemplars and ritual exemplars. We need to be the experts, but it's not our mitzvah. It's everybody's mitzvah. So people can learn from us, but it's not more my mitzvah than anybody else in this room here to visit the sick. Everybody should visit the sick and take care of the bereaved, etc., etc., etc. So, yes.
It's interesting. I've always been uncomfortable with the idea of like waiting for the mourner to talk. I mean, I understand that you don't want them to be bombarded with nudniks and all that. But it is interesting that Hashem is the one that initiates the conversation with Yitzchak after Mot Avraham. So, it's such as, again, on your point that, there's a balance, not to overwhelm the patient. But sometimes it's like people are sitting around, and sometimes it's healthy, and sometimes I think it would be healthy for
Like
someone.
what Lori was saying, you have to read the situation.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You do indeed.
Yeah.
You do indeed. I want you to hold on to that till we get to the second text. I'm going to deal with those points in the second text. I want to just finish one or two things up with this. By the way, somebody asked me about this a few minutes ago. I don't remember who it was, but when a chaplain goes into the room, the model that I described is not an absolute model. So when I go into a hospital room, I don't just sit there and go.
Right.
I'll greet them. I'll ask them, make sure. I have to, by hospital halacha, to check on their name. I have to do that, we're obligated to do that. And it'll begin a conversation, but within that context of the conversation, I will let them guide me. So it's not absolute.
But
Now,
that doesn't mean, from a clinical perspective, that doesn't mean like, don't say anything unless they speak.
Right.
Whether
Exactly,
that was
exactly.
It means follow their lead.
Exactly.
Right?
Very good.
Right?
Exactly. It's exactly what it means. Even in a Shiva house, you don't just go in and go, but actually people do. And let me tell you one story in favor of that model. This is a story I heard from when we lived on Long Island. We sent our kids to a school called Hank, Hebrew Academy in Nassau County. Excellent school, at least in its day, and the dean was a student of my father-in-law's from Chicago, Moshe Gottesman, really a crack educator. So the principal of the school, of the high school, was Benjamin Schubert, who was a Torah Vodas guy, good guy. And when I first published the book in '95, he told me the following story. He said when his Rebbe, Rav Pam, lost one of his parents, he went to visit his Rebbe, his Rosh Hashiva, Rav Pam, Torah Vodas. And he knew the halacha, and the halacha is you're supposed to sit there and wait for them to talk. So he went there, and he sat there, and he sat there, and he sat there, and then he realized, oy vey, did I blow this? My Rebbe, illustrious Rosh Hashiva, I messed up. He said, and he left. And he thought, yeah, well, I messed up here. But his Rebbe actually called him after shit was over and said, actually, your visit was one of the more meaningful ones. I didn't want to talk. I prefer just to sit there. But I think taking your lead, and taking really doesn't just mean verbally, it means you assess everything. The body language, the room, what's going on in the room, what's there. And there may be other ways of initiating a conversation without words, and I'm going to actually get to that right now. But
Did you negate the family in these conversations?
Did I negate?
No, I don't mean to negate them, but you're talking about speaking to the patient,
Yeah.
but usually there's family there too.
Well, there's no usually here. But when there is family there, I do indeed engage them. In other words, the whole picture includes whoever's in the room. It all depends.
Thank you.
But yes, we are trained in family systems. Absolutely. 100%. One last point before we go on to the next text, okay? Just so you should know that this text is also legislated in halacha. Look in the Rambam, Perek, it's Hilchot Avel, Perek Yud Daled, in the first halacha there. It's also in the Shulchan Aruch, in Hilchot Bikur Cholim. And you look at the Gra there, and he traces it to this text. So this is not just Agadata, this is halacha. This is a sacred obligation. It is Agadata, but it's not. It's actually something we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be like that. Okay,
Can I ask a question?
please.
So how do you understand, this being for everyone, and yet there are many, many people, I would say, who are not skilled at this,
Mm-hmm.
and some can get more skilled, but there are many people who will never be able to read body language or read a room, and yet we think this is for everyone. So how do you understand that?
So again, there's a text that I didn't include here. I had to keep this down to 45 minutes or however many minutes we have here. As part of it says low battery here. I don't know if you
Oh,
want
no.
to deal with that.
Sorry.
I hope it'll last.
It's going to be fun.
We'll see.
It's going to be okay.
All right.
We'll have a Muna.
We'll have a moment. Very good. Very good. There's another text I didn't. This is part of a larger training on Bikur Cholim that we offer in the community, and we're doing it at Skokie Valley, actually at the end of March into April. So if you'd like to join us, it's free, and the shul would be delighted to have people who are not members of the shul come to it. But we are helping to help them redo their Bikur Cholim committee, and we're going to do it at Bethel, in Highland Park, sometime in the fall, and at Beth Judea in Long Grove, sometime later this year. I don't have dates for that yet. In the longer training, there's another text that I study, which is again from that long sugya in Nadarim that deals with Bikur Cholim, and on there it talks about how that someone who visits the sick should love them as they love their own soul, as they love themselves. They don't quote the Ahavta l'recha kamocha, but I think that's what they had in mind. Love your neighbors yourself. And it talks about it's the same text that talks about how visiting the sick takes away 60s of the illness. It's the same Gemara, okay? And it said basically it works only if you love the patient as you love yourself. But even if you don't, it still helps. So everything helps, and not everybody is going to be an expert at it, and that's not the expectation. In other words, it's for professionals like people like me and like Rabbi Winter. Hi, Bobby. Her husband is also one of my colleagues, and other people who are in the field who do this professionally with extra training. So we're the professionals, but the mitzvah belongs to everybody, and you don't have to be good at it. You just have to bring yourself. Bring your caring ear, your listening ear, your heart. That's all you need.
And remember, it's about the other guy, not about you.
Very good. Although on the profession, it's actually true, but actually in the professionalized version, part of how we're trained as chaplains in CPE is to be aware of our own feelings. In other words, it's feeling or social workers, transference, and countertransference. So actually, it is about us, but that's not for Bikur Cholim visitors. That's for professionals only.
It can still be about the other person, but it involves you.
Absolutely, 100%.
Question?
Yes.
So in here we have the 4 examples of helping people in need. Is there some, obviously there are many different ways to walk in God's way. Is there some all-purpose goal we should have in walking in God's ways? Is there some type of way in which we should approach this in terms of trying to walk in God's ways?
I think that's one of those questions that has many answers. I think each of you could probably answer that yourselves in your own way. For me, we could probably spend the rest of the time actually talking about that very question.
That's what I intended to do.
But I want to get to the other text before I'm done, though. So I do
It's
want
all
to.
about my question.
Okay. I think it's all in the relationship. I find God, the CPE version of the question, where's God in this? God's in the relationship. God's in the room because I'm somehow finding a way in my own human, imperfect, but professionally trained way to connect with the other person. God's in the connection. That's how I walk in God's ways. I take this Gemara very seriously. I will probably find some version of this on my tombstone after 120 years. He tried to walk in God's ways, or some Hebrew version of that. this is a passion, and that's what I spent this is my doctoral dissertation, so I'm revealing myself now, and my published work and my professional work, and so, but for other people, it might not resemble what Joe Ozarowski does, which is fine.
I think there's other levels to it too, because one thing, I don't know if you want to move on, but one thing that strikes me about the specific pasuk that they chose, Aharei Shemot Patele,
Mm-hmm.
right after God. Torah has many expressions for being with God, like Et Ha'Elohim Hipalech Noach,
Yes.
right? Walking with God.
Yes.
And Abraham says, Ha'Elohim Asher Hipalachti Lifanav.
Mm-hmm.
I walk before God.
Mm-hmm.
So I won't bother you with my whole drasha about this and what the different levels of being with God are. But the first level, before all of those sophisticated spiritual levels, is after God, walking after God, like this. This is basic and universal, as we were saying a moment ago. So that's why it comes to universal goals. I think that's embedded. Actually, you might ask, in fact, what's the Gemara bothered by? Why does it ask? My dichtiv achrei Hashem eketam teleicha? Because it's so unusual to have this expression of walking after God. So what does that actually mean? We know what Abraham meant when he walked before God. We know what Noah was when he walked with God. But what does it mean to walk after God? And everybody has to do it. So that, to me, that spurs the question, and it results in this answer.
I think that's great, and that's not only drush. I think that might be pshat, actually. I think so. Okay. Okay. Let's continue. I do want to cover at least the next one, even if I don't get to the last one. This is a great little tanchuma, which extends the whole Bikur Cholim paradigm. So you all know the psukim. Vayira elav Hashem be'elonei mamrei v'hu yoshev petach oel kechom hayom, and God appears to Avram, to him in the terebinths. I never knew what terebinths were. I'm sorry. Of Mamre, as Abraham said, in the tent door in the heat of the day. Vayisayna vayar, and Abraham looks up his eyes and sees 3 anashim. We're not going to get into the question of why the angels called anashim. That's not important for us. But what is important is tanchuma. Kevan shenigla alav, when God revealed God's self. Kadosh Baruch Hu omeid the Avram Yoshev. The Holy One was standing, and Avram was sitting. Shenemar v'hu Yoshev, because the text in Chumash says he was sitting. Okay, thank you. Good to know. The noeg sheba olam, the custom of the world. Keshat talmid choleh, when the student is sick. The harav holech levakro, and the Rebbe, the Rav, comes to visit him. Hatalmidim halchim tchila. There's an entourage of students that come in, and they say, Shlichut harav leveito shel choleh. There's a delegation of the teacher of the Rebbe coming to visit the sick person. Lomar, to say, Sharav mevakesh levakro, that the Rebbe wants to come and visit him. The Rebbe's here. Ta-dam, ta-dam, ta-dam. But Kadosh Baruch Hu Elokein, the Holy One, is not like that. Kishamal Avraham, when Avraham braced himself. It's a pretty painful operation for a gentleman in his late 90s. V'haya mitzta'er min hamilah, and was feeling pain from the circumcision. Now we could darshan mitzta'er as feeling sorry, but that's a separate drasha. I'm just interpreting as pain. He was in pain. Amar lo malachim leilech levakro. He went and told the angels, my buddy Abe, he's not feeling so well. Why don't you go and visit him a little bit? Take care of Abe over there. All right? Ad shemalachim holchim. But before the angels get there, k'damana kadosh baruch Hu, God gets there first. Sheneamar, as it says, vayira elav Hashem. God appears to Avram in pasuk Aleph. V'achar kach, and only after that does it say vayisa einav vayar. Does Abraham see the angelic visitors? Yesh anav gadol mizeh. Is there no greater humble one than this deity of ours? What's the Tanchuma teaching us? What do we learn from this Tanchuma?
Quality to emulate.
So this is how we emulate. This is an extension of what the first Gemara notes. How do we emulate God? Now, let's play this out a little bit. So what ways is Tanchuma suggesting that we actually emulate God? What do we learn from Tanchuma in terms of the actual visit?
With humility.
It's not about you, it's about the patient, about the
Okay.
person you're visiting. And in fact, from the first Gemara or whatever, we would have been, you're a hush of a person, you're imitating God by visiting the sick. It's like godlike. This is like, but you have to be humble about it. You know, it shouldn't go to our heads.
So clearly,
You were saying before also about God being at the head of everybody. Like, if we know that God is at the head, if you actually have that sense, then you're not feeling very proud. You're feeling very humble. Coming to this poor person, even though the poor person may be someone in need, and you're there to offer the need and to fill the need, but actually it's God there, and that's in a human sense, that's a kind of humility that needs to overtake you.
there's another.
Also-
Yeah, please. Yeah,
Sorry.
I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
Also, don't think you're so busy. I have so much to do. I'll get there when I get there, as soon as you can. It's the reason like run.
Yes. Very good. Very good. There's another Gemara, again, I didn't include everything here, I couldn't, but there's another Gemara from that long sugya in Nedarim, and it's a famous story of Rabbi Akiva coming to visit one of his 6 students. We don't even know the name of this poor Nebuchadnezzar anonymous student. But it says, Bishvil shekibdo v'rivtso, because Rabbi Akiva, kibdo v'rivtso, which is normally translated as sweeping and sprinkling the room, it wasn't beneath Rabbi Akiva to clean up the schmutz. It's also, kibdo is a purposely chosen word. Kibdo means to chabed, to clean up. It also means to honor. You all know this. So Rabbi Akiva took his lead from God. One last point, and then we have to finish up. I got 2 minutes, I've just been told. What does God, I promised I'd come back to this point. What does God say to Avraham in this visit? I'll give you a hint. It's a trick question.
Right?
What does God say? God doesn't say anything. So again, the dialogue is not always what's most important. Sometimes a hug, a smile, a handshake, other types of connection and communication are what's needed here and how we become godlike.
It is interesting, though, that the halacha also prohibits many kinds of comforting and affectionate touching that might be comforting to a sick person.
It does, and some of it actually troubles me. At the Shiva house, we were discussing the question of bringing children into a Shiva house. And I'm troubled by that, because I got to tell you, when I was thinking for my father, I found great comfort in having young children with me. So while respecting what the books say, I think in general, in Hilchot Avelut, we take our lead from the mourner, and if the mourner needs a certain type of comfort, I think there may be some leeway there. So that's what I'll suggest. I'm not one to dismiss the stuff that's in the holy books, and I'm an Orthodox rabbi, and I follow the Shulchan Aruch. But the fact is, I think the Chazal built some leeway into a very exquisitely designed system. How we become godlike is how we extend relationships, and sometimes the mourner needs certain things. So thanks for mentioning that. We have time to do one more quick Gemara, and I'll do this. All right. This is about Avelut. All right, it's a great Gemara. V'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, meit ba'ir, when there's a death in the city, kol b'nei ha'ir asurim b'asiyat malacha. The people of the city are forbidden to do work because you got to take care of the needs of the dead. Rav Hanuna ikla l'Daromta. Rav Hanuna visited a town called Daromta, which is probably in southern Iraq today. Shema kol shipura d'shichva. He heard the voice of the funeral shofar. Now, I don't know about you, Chicago Jewish funerals did not sound a shofar when we had my mother-in-law's funeral last week. I don't think they ever do it, neither does Weinstein and Pies or anybody else in town. Okay, but in those days they did. He saw people going about their work. Amar lahu, he said, Lihavu hanach inshe anshe b'shamta. We should place these people under the shamta. It's a limited form of excommunication. Lo shichva ika b'mata. Isn't there a dead person in town? Amrulay, they said to him, Chavurata ika b'mata. There's a chevra. There's a community. There's a committee in town. Amar lahu, he said, if that's the case, ihachi sharia lahu, then it's permitted to you. The brief summary, which I only have like 30 seconds left here, is that even though we are all obligated to comfort the bereaved, following in God's ways, it is not always possible for everybody to go everywhere all the time. And that's why a community, in its quest to become more godlike, is allowed to appoint a chevra of people to represent the community to walk in God's ways. In other words, we would like to visit every sick person and bury every dead person and help everybody do everything, but we can't do that. It's just not physically possible. So we can appoint representatives to do that, and that's how a community becomes godlike, by designating a Bikur Cholim committee, a Chevra Kadisha, a this committee, that committee. This Gemara in Smachot, okay, notes the practice of the Chavarot of Yerushalayim. Keep in mind they're referring to Second Temple Yerushalayim, But Smachot was one of the later Masechta that was written maybe 500 years later after the temple was destroyed. But that's how they traced it. Some went to the house of the mourning, Shiva house. Some went to the house of feasting, that's the wedding hall. Some went to the bris. Some went to gather up the bones, which was an ancient burial custom a year or so after the death. So the idea of committees representing the community is a very ancient one, going back a couple thousand years. And so here you have some things to think about, how we can become more godlike by walking in God's ways, by reaching out to each other in our times of need. And I want to thank you for learning with me and listening to me and helping me. She's happy up there. I know she's happy. She would have loved this.
So much.
This last Gemara is also a good example of that.